Hello and welcome back to my channel. It's Tina, and today we're doing my January reading wrap-up. January was an incredible reading month, both in quality and quantity. I ended up finishing 15 books in the month of January, which is pretty good. That's near my all-time high. I don't know what got into me. I carried a couple over from December, but I just got in a real reading streak, which I love when that happens. So in this video, I'm gonna do quick reviews for the 15 books that I read in January. I'm gonna give you some of my reading stats from the StoryGraph, and that's about it. So in case you weren't aware, StoryGraph has this amazing feature where it just gives you a wrap up for each month. You can generate it, you can download it, and they give you a bunch of different options. But for me, it's showing that I read 15 books last month, and that's 5,239 pages, which is insane. My average rating was 3.92, which I'm a little bit proud of because one of my goals for this year was to be more discerning. I feel like before I would say, that was fine, book was 4 stars, which is totally not the case. Now I'm saying, meh, it was fine is 3 stars, 2 stars, I don't recommend, 4 stars, I liked it, 5 stars, I obviously loved it. So that's my rating system. I had a lot of books that I loved. I had a couple that I really did not like, but that's where it came with the 3.92. I also walked away with 3 5-star reads, which I will get into a little bit about that. I was sort of debating on the Stepford Wives, but it was just so smart, and I'm gonna go ahead and give it a 5-star. I'm not overly stingy, but I'm also somebody that gives probably about 25 or so 5 stars a year, and January to have 3 is a good sign. Average book length was 343 pages, which is pretty impressive to me, and 93% fiction, 7% nonfiction is pretty typical. I did do my 1 nonfiction a month. That was one of my goals, to make sure I'm doing at least 1 nonfiction book a month. So I did meet that. And my highest genre was thriller, followed by literary, and then science fiction, which is actually pretty interesting to me. And audio, 93%, print 7. I only did 1 book in print this month, but that's pretty typical for me. I'm just gonna go in the order that I read them. All right, first book that I finished in 2025. It was very strategic because it was The Favorites by Lane Fargo. I knew I was going to love this book. I started it in 2024, actually in November, because I was vetting it for our winter reading guide for Book Talk, etc., something that we offered our patrons, and I just knew I wanted to include it. I knew it was going to be a buzzy book and fantastic, and then I put it aside. I left the last 25% or so for January because, one, I wanted to read it in 2025 in the year that it was released, but also I wanted to make sure to get the audio because I saw that there was a full cast narration, including Johnny Weir, who is an ice skater that I love, and he's now an announcer, and he's incredible, and the character that he narrates is just perfect. I am glad that I waited. The Favorites is about 2 ice dancers. They grow up together, and they are not the typical ice dancers. They don't come from money. They come from a small town in Illinois, but really fall in love with the sport. I should say Kat falls in love with the sport and Heath falls in love with Kat, and they grow up together as ice dancers and end up finding really good success. This book follows them as they chase Olympic gold, but as you can imagine, the road to finding gold is not always straightforward. And so there's a lot of drama in this, a lot of surprises, twists and turns, and I loved it. I ate it up. I was here for it the entire time. If you're somebody that doesn't like your books overly dramatic, you might not like this. Also, I should say this is neither a thriller nor a romance. It's contemporary fiction to me. I loved everything about it. 5 stars. After that, I read Diavola, and unfortunately, this was not for me. I did not enjoy this book whatsoever. It should work, right? It's about this family that takes a holiday to a place in Italy. They're going to this castle, I want to say, and when they get there, everyone's kind of like, oh, really? You're going to this place? And they seem a little bit surprised that the family is headed there. And they get there, immediately the vibes are wrong, not only with the house, but also with the inhabitants, with the family members. They are bickering, tons and tons of siblings squabbling, which I'm not usually a fan of. It takes a very specific book with siblings in it for me to enjoy it. It's funny, I'm an only child, and you would think like any sort of sibling dynamics I would appreciate and enjoy getting that viewpoint. Maybe if you do have siblings, this would read very true to you. I don't have that dynamic in my life, so I just wasn't enjoying being in their heads. The haunting or sort of the scary part, which makes this horror, was just fine for me. There is a particular trope that I don't like in my horror. And I'm not going to tell you what it is because it's a spoiler, but there's no way for anybody who would recommend that book to me to know that. It's just a particular type of trope in horror that I'm like, not my favorite. Overall, I gave this one 2 stars. Of course, next is the book that's lowest on my pile sitting in front of me in the stack. But the next book that I read after Diavola was Alice Feeney's Beautiful Ugly. And this one was a wild ride. First of all, look at this cover. It's amazing. What this is about is a man who is an author, and it opens with him just making the New York Times bestseller list. He is thrilled, and he's on the phone with his wife, and he's telling her, hey, guess what? I made the list. And she's like, oh my gosh, amazing. I'm headed home. Hold on a minute. There's somebody in the road. And she gets out, and he's like, don't do it. And she does, and then she disappears. And then the book catches up about a year later, and he's grieving the loss of his wife, and he still doesn't know where she is. But he is on contract, and he owes his editor some books. So she says, hey, I've got this cottage in Scotland. I want you to take it for a year or for however long you need to get me the books. And so he does that. When he gets to this island, the vibes are off. But what this book did really, really well, it gives you a lot of side characters. It gives you a lot of WTF moments. I didn't know who to trust. Now, I didn't particularly like the author, but that didn't matter. I could not for the life of me figure out what was going on. I never would have guessed the ending. Bonus points for it being unique. If you need something that is going to take your mind off the state of the world, this is a great one. It's so wild. It's not something really that I think would ever happen, but like I had the best time with it. Also did the audio for this. I thought the audio was great. I'm giving this about 4.25 stars, but I am going to recommend it, and it might be on my favorite thrillers of the year list. Then I had to read for our StoryGraph Picks Our Reads episode where we did an interview with Nadia from the StoryGraph. If you have not listened to that podcast episode, please do. It's incredible. I will link the YouTube video corresponding to it. That's just our audio here in the description. But the first book that the StoryGraph picked for me was White Smoke. I think I was in a horror mood, and luckily I had this one on my shelf. I enjoyed this. It's a theme for this month is people going to a spot where the vibes are off. So far, the last 2 books had that, and this one has it as well. It is about a family that moves from California to somewhere in the Midwest, and they do so because the mom of the family, the matriarch, gets a new job. And with the job, they get a house, and it's this new development. The family is starting over. They are a blended family, and you come to find out that the main character had things happen to her back at home, which is why they're looking for this new start, and it just happened to correspond with this job. They move to the new house, and immediately things are questionable. This is YA, so the main character is young. She's still in high school. She has OCD, and you can tell that she's really fixating on certain things, including bed bugs. So if that is a trigger for you, don't read this. The author did a really good job making me uncomfortable with it. But it's not only that, the neighborhood is off, the things that are going on, there's rumors, and it's just questionable. If you read Alyssa Cole's book, When No One Is Watching, that's a great comp for this. That's the vibe that you're going to get with White Smoke. Now, this is horror. There are horror elements to it. I appreciated it. You get a creepy house. I got a solid resolution, although I will say the resolution did feel not rushed, but sort of truncated. So I wonder if there's going to be a next book for this. Either way, I enjoyed it, and I'm giving it 4 stars. The second book that StoryGraph recommended for me was Mad Honey by Jodi Picoult and Jennifer Finney Boylan. Really glad it did. Again, this was one that I had on my shelves, and I love Jodi Picoult. I've been reading her for 20 years, like truly for a really long time. And this one is excellent. It was a GMA book club pick, and I can totally see it being good for book club. This book is about a family. You've got Olivia and Asher, and she is a single mom who's raised her son to be right. They raise bees, and that plays a big role in the story. And he is dating Lily. Lily is relatively newer to their town, and she moved there with her mother, and the two start dating, Asher and Lily. And the book opens up with Asher calling his mom, and the point of view is, by the way, from the point of view of the mom, primarily. He calls his mom and says, Mom, Lily's dead. And everything kicks off from there. And it's true. That's not a spoiler. That is going to be a setup with this book. Not only is Lily dead, though, Asher's being questioned by the police because they suspect that he might have had something to do with it. He was the one that found her, and so they're obviously questioning him. This one has a lot of ethical questions. It has a lot of hidden surprises that you might not expect with this. Go in with an open mind. It's written by two authors, and I think they each write different sections, possibly different characters. And I thought this one was really good. It is a story about identity, about what makes a person, a story of secrets, a story of sort of reclaiming yourself. And it's also a legal story. You do get some courtroom scenes. Of course, Asher is trying to prove his innocence. He's trying to prove that he loved her. And, maybe he did, maybe he didn't. You find out in the book, though, what happened to Lily. I highly recommend this one. I'm going to give it 4.5 stars. The next book I read is The Marriage Act by John Marrs. I'm in my John Marrs era. I've read a ton of his books over the last year or so. And John Marrs writes in two different spheres. He's got his dystopian books and speculative books, and then he's got his thrillers. This one is one of his speculative books, and it's in the same world as The One and The Family Experiment. Both I read last year and enjoyed. The One is a 5-star read for me. This one was less successful. It is interesting, though. It is set in Britain in the near future. A right-wing government believes it has the answer to all of society's problems, the Sanctity of Marriage Act, which basically encourages people to get married. And if they're not married, they face severe consequences. And then the government gets really, really involved in people's marriages, in people's lives, and they have to consent to a lot of surveillance in order to get the benefits that come with being married. This one has a very interesting premise. He is so creative, and I really appreciated that. There's a lot going on here. And this book I felt every one of his pages. He's got 450 pages in this one, and it felt like it. There are quite a few couples that you're following. I read this in early-ish January, and I have to say I can't remember many of the couples. That's not a good sign, because a lot of I don't think that I could distinguish them when I was actually reading it. I will say I did the audio. Fine narration. It just got bogged down in a lot of elements. We did this for my in-person book club, and none of us really loved it. So I think this is a pass. I gave it 3 stars. It's not poorly written. It's got some interesting thought experiments. It's just overall fine. It wasn't my fave. Next, I picked books based on their editor's note. I thought that was such a fun episode or video to film. But one of the books that I picked up for that was The Note by Alafair Burke. I wanted to try this author. I had never read her, and I know she's got a lot of books. I will definitely read her again. This one is about a group of friends that go on a Hamptons vacation. It's a girls' weekend, and when they're there, they're having cocktails, they're doing the things, and one of them decides to play a prank. And the prank ends up having severe consequences, including a missing person, and the women get involved, and they're sort of lying to each other. What I liked, the prank itself, I could see why it got people in trouble. I can see why they did it, and I could totally see something that looks innocent on the surface, like going way too far. That I enjoyed. I also liked the main character. I thought she was interesting. She's a lawyer. I wanted her to have a little bit more agency throughout, but I see she was like struggling with some things. What didn't work for me, though, were the friends themselves. It's a group of 3. It's the main character and her 2 friends, and I could not distinguish them. There were also a lot of flashbacks, which makes sense as you're reading. The flashbacks for me, I don't know, it was fine. Honestly, I wanted to like this book a lot more than I did. I think it's a pass. I gave this one 3 stars. Another book that I picked based on the editor's note was Cross My Heart by Megan Collins. This one was a wild ride. Definitely you'll hear me talk about this again. It's going to be on my favorite thrillers of the year list. And it is about a woman who gets a heart transplant. And she gets this transplant, and skirting HIPAA laws finds out who the donor was, and there is this thing that they offer called Donor Connect, and you can actually connect with the donor's family members if you want, and there's consent and all of these things. So she starts writing these letters, or emails I should say, to the donor's husband, and so in the book you get a lot of those emails, which I think is such a fun tie-in. Rosie is such a great main character. She is somebody that had my heart. She was, pun intended, she's somebody I really enjoyed reading about. She works at a dress shop for brides, and so every day she's seeing brides, and she is somebody that just wants her happily ever after. That's like her biggest wish, and she sees the best in people, and in doing so can get taken advantage of a lot. There were so many twists in this one. I could not see where it was going. My only complaint was the actual ending. I'm gonna leave it there. I would have liked to see something different, but The last couple of pages, though, brought it back up. I'm going to give this one 4.5 to 4.75 stars. Not exactly a 5-star thriller, but still I highly, highly recommend it. Great for a distraction. Man, oh man. Next one I read was The 3 Lives of Kate Kay by Kate Fagan. And this book, this is in the vein of The 7 Husbands of Evelyn Hugo. It is about this famous author who has a lot of secrets from her early life, and she runs away and changes her name. And you follow her throughout the book because this is her memoir, and she's not telling it straight. She's actually interviewing a lot of the people that played a role in her life throughout. And I enjoyed this one. I really did. Kate Kay, oddly, was not my favorite character, which seems interesting that I still enjoyed the book, even though I didn't like the main character, but there were a lot of solid side characters. I loved the queer relationships in this one. I enjoyed kind of getting mad at some of the characters, which is a sign of a good reading experience for me. I did set up a read along in StoryGraph. If anyone wants to read this and chime in, feel free. I will link that in the description, but I think this one is fun. The ending for me was a little abrupt. I wanted more climax. I wanted more of a payoff. I was like waiting for a big thing to happen and it didn't. Still, overall, I do recommend this one. I'm giving it 4.25 stars. The next was my nonfiction for the month. It's The House of My Mother by Sherry Frankie. And this one was tough to read. Tough because it is a memoir and she is talking about being the oldest child of a Mormon family that got very big into the blogging world. And she's talking a lot about her mother, who created this YouTube channel and ended up getting a lot of fame from that. The thing about her YouTube channel is she did exploit her children a lot. Like they would, any family moment was fair game for their channel. So she's one of these family vloggers. And Sherry was the oldest child in this. The book opens, you find out though that things get taken to the extreme because it's not just a mommy blogger channel. She ends up getting wrapped up in something that's cult-like and neglects her children. The things I liked about this, I feel like the author, the memoirist, did a good job with giving us just a glimpse of what happened without giving us like all of the horrific things. She did not name her siblings except her oldest brother because they're still really young and she didn't want to exploit them. I very much appreciated that. I do recommend it. It's probably not on my favorite memoirs ever. I'm going to give it 3.5 stars. Next is Sky Full of Elephants by Sibo Campbell, and I didn't read this for any specific episode. This is a book that I started in 2024 around Thanksgiving, and it was not the right time for me at that time to finish it. I probably got maybe this far into it, so maybe like a third into it, and I put it aside. And then I decided to pick it back up because I, one, love the cover, two, I love the premise. It's speculative fiction, and I love speculative fiction. It's about what would happen if one day all of the white people walked into the nearest body of water and drowned. And it considers that question from the viewpoint of Charlie Brunton, who is a man who was imprisoned when the time that thing happened, and then ended up becoming a professor at Howard. And when he's a professor, he gets a phone call from someone he wasn't even sure existed, and it's his daughter, who is biracial, and her family were white, and they all drowned. So she's basically reaching out to him with a very specific goal in mind. She hears that there is a community in Alabama that has white people in it, and she wants to go there to see if any of her family members survived. I liked a lot about this. It's a road trip book. It's a father-daughter story. It's creative. It's definitely creative. And one of my biggest question marks was, were we going to get a rationale as to why they walked in the water? And you do. I can't explain why this wasn't a 5-star read. I liked so many elements about it. I loved identity. Sydney, I will say, is a teenager in this, and I struggle with very sassy teenage girl characters, and she is struggling in this book, and she's rude for a lot of it, but then she has like a good sort of character arc, and you understand, obviously, the end of the world is here. You don't need to be polite, but it was harder for me to read this. Charlie, I liked. I was sympathetic to him as a character, and there were some great side characters in it. It's interesting. This one's very creative. This is a debut. I will absolutely read this author again. A Comp for Me is Hell of a Book by Jason Mott. So if you liked that, you might like this one. I'm going to give this one 4 stars. And then I simply could not wait any longer. I picked up my most anticipated book for 2025, Wild Dark Shore by Charlotte McConaughey, and I loved this book. I really did. I highlighted a ton. I'm eventually going to go back in and put my tabs in it, but what this is about is the Salt family. They live on an island and they're taking care of the world's largest seed bank, which I did not know existed, sadly enough. This one, by the way, is climate fiction. And they're taking care of this seed bank because it's going under and the island is eventually going to go under due to rising sea levels. So they got to rescue as many seeds as they possibly can, and then they got to get off the island. The island used to be home to a lot of researchers, but then all of them left and basically left this family to care for the seeds, and the boat is coming to rescue them in about 3 weeks. Nobody else is there until one day a woman's body washes up on shore and she's badly hurt and they have to decide what to do with her. They end up working with her and, they sort of, you see where the family goes with this, but it's very clear that there are secrets on this island. You as the reader don't know, you as the reader have your suspicions, but this is a full 5-star, change my viewpoint type of book. It is a book that makes me want to be a better person. I highlighted something on dang near every page and I just loved the writing. It's nature writing. It makes you ponder the meaning of life, and nobody does it like Charlotte McConaughey. I'm desperately sad that I'm going to have to wait probably several more years for her next book, but I can't recommend this enough. Highly recommend, 5 stars. And then I picked up my least favorite book of the month, which was I'm Starting to Worry About This Black Box of Doom by Jason Paragon. And I picked this one up for our favorite audiobook narrators episode. I picked it up because Ari Filakos narrates it. He's my favorite audiobook narrator. Narration was 10 of 10. I just did not like this book. It is about a Lyft driver who gets a call from a woman to requests him to drive her across the country and he's going to do it for $200K. And so he's like, I'll do it, whatever. But of course there's rules. He can't look in the box and he has to leave his devices at home. What I loved is you get dropped right into the action. It was mildly funny in the beginning. And I loved that it was pretty action packed. And I was very curious to see what was in this box. And you do find out what's in the box. I liked that. I appreciated it. Where it lost me is there was so much dialogue in this, and you come to find out that the main character has some very misogynistic views of women, and I kept waiting for it to be brought back and sort of re-explained and somehow made okay, and it never was. So this one, I am not the target audience for. I didn't enjoy it. I gave it 2 stars. The other book I picked up for our narrator episode was Red by January Lavoie, who did a great job. It's The Stepford Wives by Ira Levin. This is a short little novel from the early 1970s, and you probably have heard of The Stepford Wives. I loved this book. It is horror, but it's very light horror. It's about a family that moves to a town in Stepford, Connecticut, and quickly the mom realizes that the neighbors are odd. They are not willing to give up their housework to spend any time outside of the home, and they all seem very homogenous. And so she starts asking questions. This book is so brilliant. I can see why they wanted to adapt it. It's quick. I could read it. I think I read it over the course of 2 days. I really enjoyed the talk of marriage and just kind of this slice of life at what marriage was like and what the expectations for wives were in the 70s. And I think this one holds up today, 5 stars. Finally, the last book I read in January was Homeseeking by Carissa Chen. This was our Book Talk Etc's community read for the month, and I loved discussing it with our patrons. I really had to plow through this book because I started it too late and it's it's almost 500 pages. But I'm happy to say that I read it and I loved it. This book is about Haiwen and Suchi, who were kids that grew up together, and they had this, sort of unbreakable bond. They bonded over music. Suchi is this sort of hard-headed, willing to argue with anything young woman, and Haiwen is more in his shell, and he is a musician, and the two hit it off. And the book opens with war, and it starts in April 1947 in Shanghai, and the Haiwen's brother is going off to war, and sort of that kicks off everything else that happens. This book is layered. It is about what might have been. It's about whether or not you look backward and have regrets over your life, or if you choose to only look forward and, understand that you made the best choices you could in the moment. I learned a lot about a side of history that I knew very little about. I did the audio for this. Audio is fantastic because it's got this authentic narration. It's an own voices book and an own voices narrator. I highly recommend kind of doing a tandem read, which is what I did. This one is one you will want to unpack. I also appreciated that it had older characters. I don't read a ton of books that have characters that are not in their 20s, 30s, even 40s. So I really appreciated having main characters in their 70s. I also love that you get a lot of time with them when they are together, because the point of view from Suchi is told from now into the future, and from Haiwen is from the past to the now. They sort of intersect and cross with the point of with their POVs. I was never confused, and I think this book is so fantastic. What a debut. Highly recommend it, and I'm going to give it 4.75 stars. All right, well, that is it. These are all the books that I read in the month of January. What an incredible reading month. If I can read like that every month, 2025 is going to be fantastic. In the comments, let me know what your favorite book of January was. If you pick up any of these on my recommendation, I would love to hear what you think of it. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and I'll see you in my next video. Bye. I quite like this. That's not true.